Welcome back, Dr. Hoffman, and it's very nice to meet you, Melissa.
Great to meet you, Charlotte. Thanks for having us.
Great to be back.
Well, Dr. Christy, let's start with you. So did pet acquisition and ownership increase, decrease, or more or less stay flat during the pandemic? And how did you come to this determination in your research?
So in May of 2021, the ASPCA collected survey data from a nationally representative sample of people across the country. They got 10,000 responses. And based on those responses, it looks like the number of households that have dogs decreased from prior to March of 2021 to March of 2020 to May of 2021. The number of households with cats stayed pretty much about where it was prior to the pandemic.
So, Melissa, maybe you can explain how pandemic-related factors may have made it difficult to acquire a dog or cat during this time, which seems to be different than what we're hearing out there.
Absolutely. So what we found in the research was that many households did acquire a pet during the pandemic, almost 1 in 5, and the top 3 sources remain the same. So friends and family, shelters, and breeders. But one source that we know had a lot of operational shifts were shelters. They needed to shift operations based on what we knew at the time about the virus, so how it was transmitted, and what might slow the spread to keep their staff and clients safe while still caring for the animals.
Talk to us about what you found out about rehoming dogs and cats during the study, because I thought this was really, really a key factor. I mean, from what I understand, and most of the reports I've seen, nobody really addressed that issue, the issue of rehoming dogs and cats.
Throughout the pandemic, pets have remained a really important source of love and companionship for people. And they brought many individuals and families comfort during this difficult time, unprecedented difficult times, really, during the pandemic. And we found from our study that the vast majority of pet owners remain committed to caring for their animals throughout the pandemic. So of those who did acquire a dog or cat during the pandemic, 90% who'd acquired a dog still had that dog when we collected the data. And 85% of cat owners still had their cat. What we found really interesting with this study is that people, when they did need to rehome an animal, were turning to members of their community. They were very commonly, if they had to rehome, they were rehoming with family members, friends, neighbors. And they were doing this more often, actually, than they were relinquishing animals to shelters or rescues.
A lot of people either lost their jobs or put on furloughs. And I know people were really concerned about, number one, not only veterinary expenses, but also pet expenses, and also the ability not to be able to get those supplies that they normally have. And even vets were even worried. I mean, most vets stayed in business because they were considered essential services. But I know that was a big concern of a lot of folks out there, a lot of pet owners out there. Any comments, ladies?
When you're having trouble securing housing, or you have housing questions about where you're going to live next month, or you have questions about where your income is coming from, or difficulty accessing veterinary care, these are all things that make it more difficult to keep pets, and all things that were exacerbated by the pandemic. And so definitely these were problems that people were facing. And so if there was any sort of increase in pet rehoming during the pandemic, likely it was due to these factors, rather than people just frivolously deciding they don't want their pet anymore. For most people, pets are considered members of their family, and they work really hard to keep them.
Can you talk to us a little bit about gender and economic status? Did that play a factor in your research?
We found that men were more likely to report having acquired a pet during the pandemic than were women. And we wonder if this maybe relates to differences in how the pandemic has affected men and women. So in a lot of cases, people switched to remote work. And for women, this commonly meant they were working from home and also caring for children who were home from school during time schools were shut down. Men, however, may have experienced this opportunity to work from home in a different way, and maybe felt they had more leisure time to invest in a pet. We found, though, that men also were more likely to report having rehomed an animal during the pandemic compared to women as well. Regarding income, we found that people in the lowest income category that we studied, which this category was households with less than 50,000, were more likely to have rehomed an animal during the pandemic. One thing, though, that surprised us was that households that reported an income greater than 100,000 indicated they were considering rehoming a pet in the near future. They were more likely to be considering. Still, this was a very small percentage of people. And this was a little bit puzzling, but we just wonder if maybe people in this income category were expecting more extreme lifestyle changes.
You mean like moving?
Maybe moving, or just maybe being out of the house more, maybe traveling more as a result of the easing of pandemic-related restrictions. So we wondered if maybe they just are going to experience this greater lifestyle shift, making it challenging to maintain a pet. But again, this was a very small percentage overall of people who indicated they were considering rehoming.
I want to get back to you, Melissa. Can you summarize the overall study and why this information is important to our listening audience?
We at the ASPCA have been looking to this data since the start of the pandemic, and we've all seen pieces. Shelters and rescues have been in the media, starting with the outpouring of support from the public to foster and adopt, turning to concerns about returns and relinquishments as the pandemic restrictions lifted. But these are all just pieces of information. Maybe it's the media report on an individual experience of a shelter, or even our largest samples of shelter data. They're all just pieces because many animals change hands outside of the shelter system. So what we felt was that we really needed to see this at the national level so that we could put these pieces in perspective, because that's a better position to be making decisions on moving forward.
Many dogs that fill shelters around the country come from other areas of the country based on natural disasters, as well as an abundance of dogs or an abundance of breeders, in those areas. So I wanted to make that point, which it made me think from reading the study. It's something that we don't really talk about a lot, I think. What do you think, Melissa?
Understanding that the experiences from one organization can be very different also highlights the opportunity to network, for organizations to network and lean on each other. And that's an incredible opportunity. And also for national organizations and even locally to recognize that support may differ based on where you are and who you're close to. Charlotte, you asked earlier, how is this information important to your listeners? And it provides that perspective to say, reach out to your local organization if you'd like to provide support, because they may be the best to communicate what they need at that time, whether it's financial, supplies, the support of fostering or adoption. Reach out to them, because each organization really varies.
Can you give me a website where people can review your study? What about you, Dr. Christy?
We published a paper in the journal Frontiers in Veterinary Science back in November that provides all the details we've talked about today and more. And so people can find our paper in that journal, Frontiers in Veterinary Science, and it's in a special issue, which is a really cool issue called Reimagining Animal Sheltering, Support Services and Community-Driven Sheltering Methods. And so it's one of currently 15 papers in this special issue that are freely available to anyone who desires to read our paper or any of these other ones that really talk about ideas for moving animal sheltering forward.
Well, ladies, thanks again. And I'm so glad that you are here.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Thanks for viewing our content on Pet Buzz Plus.